I'm going to ask you folks to bear with me and help me because I actually had minor surgery this afternoon, and the anesthesia is worn off. I felt great 2 hours ago, and I'm like a little wobbly.
So we can't say you're drunk.
No, I'll like fall asleep. But I'm glad to have the opportunity to talk about this issue, and I thought that in some ways I would present some of the information, but also maybe be a moderator somewhat, because there are other folks in the audience that have particular concerns or questions and expertise as well that can kind of help us through the process. So I'll just present some information about this proposed project. It's been in the paper. I would urge you folks to read the article that came out in the News Leader this week that is very, very thorough. Rachel Hackney Brown, I think is how you pronounce her name, did a great job of kind of laying out the facts and some of the issues. But there are a lot of issues to concern, both pro and con. So on my part, I'm, I guess, representing Suncoast Waterkeeper. I'm the founder of Suncoast Waterkeeper. It's an environmental advocacy organization that's generally aligned with the folks that have a lot of concerns about the project and would generally be in opposition to it. However, I also am really in kind of a learning mode and am not thoroughly convinced one way or the other about this particular project at this scope. So it is a proposal for the location of a pilot project of a fish farm in the Gulf waters. And correct me if people know more facts, but it would be about 45 miles off of Venice. 30 to 40 miles off of Venice in the Gulf. It would be, there's a proposal for a permit. Right now, the permit that is under consideration, for which there's going to be a public hearing at MODE on January 28th, is for a federal national NPDES permit. It's a National Pollution Discharge Elimination permit under the Clean Water Act. So I have a lot of experience with the Clean Water Act litigation, but it's not been for this type of issue. And I also don't have a lot of experience in fisheries. We're benefited from having Julie Morris here, who has a lot of experience and I've spoken with, and hopefully you can continue to be a good resource. Just kind of facts. So it's being proposed by a Hawaiian firm that has experience with these types of fish farms in the Pacific. There is a long history of fish farming, offshore and onshore. We have experience here in Sarasota County with onshore fish farming that MODE ran, and I think they still have a program, but it was very much in the news over the last several years ago how they had a sturgeon farm and with big plans to produce
Wonderful caviar.
a lot of caviar. I don't think it really worked out very well.
Yeah, it did. They made good money on it. They sold it like $7 million.
So there's some experience with onshore aquaculture. There is no precedent in Florida or in the Gulf of Mexico that I know of for offshore saltwater aquaculture. What they're proposing is to have what they call a pilot project to raise Alamo jack, which is very much like amberjack. So what they would do is bring fingerlings, small fish, that are initially caught in Gulf waters or onshore waters, and MODE would raise them in pens, and then that would be the source of the fish that they would then take offshore in these pens when they're big enough to then grow and feed and contain in initially one large pen in the Gulf, so that, and feed them feedstock until they grow large enough to harvest, then bring back to shore and sell the fish and the meat. So the numbers are, for this pilot project, 20,000 fish for a year, which would, when harvested, be approximately 90,000 pounds. The pens are made out of like a copper mesh, and they're anchored on the Gulf shore on the bottom with 3 anchors, and they're tethered so that they would basically float in the currents. The way that they're designed, as far as I understand, is if there is rough weather or a storm, then actually lower the pen so that they wouldn't be exposed to the surface waters and the rough conditions. So they would lower it down. The depth of the water is not very deep there. I don't remember exactly how deep it is, but there were some concerns about the depth of the water there and the ability to withstand storms. I think initially they're going to be staging out of Port Manatee, but the plan is to actually maintain, and the facility would be out of Port Charlotte. And there are some questions about when they actually maintain the facility, whether that means that they're going to be going out there daily or have a barge tethered to the platform so that there's someone there all the time. Those are things I'm not really sure of. I don't know if they're fully fleshed out in the permit application. So there are, and I'll get to kind of the environmental concerns that I think everybody really wants to talk about. But, and I have a lot of questions as well. But there are also some process concerns that I want to identify for you folks. And these concerns are also out there. I think that CONA and other people have put out copies of comments from a coalition of organizations. Suncoast Waterkeeper, I took kind of the body of those comments and I modified them with some of our unique concerns that kind of more apply to more local issues, and actually kind of like tone them down because I don't have as much of a strong opposition philosophically as some of the other opponents.
Well, what I'd like to do, if we could talk about procedure a little bit, is when you finish talking, the Sierra Club has asked to make a short PowerPoint presentation. And then if Julie, after that, can address some of the things that she finds that are issues that may not be factually based, I think it's important to have that clarification. I think you're in a good position to do that. And I've got some additional information that I've done. I've talked with Larry Brand, for instance. So let's follow that part of the procedure.
Yeah, so I'll hit briefly, I think, first on the procedural issues, because this is part of the process. This hearing has been triggered by the public comment process and requests for a public hearing, where these issues that we're going to discuss can be fleshed out further. So it's governed by federal law, and there has been, this is one of a number of permits that will be required in order to actually operate this pilot project. This is the NIPTES permit, as I described. There has been a finding under a draft environmental assessment. So under the National Environmental Policy Act, they're required to look at the potential environmental impacts. If they find that there are not a likelihood of significant environmental impacts, they can do a environmental assessment. If there's the possibility that there are going to be significant impacts, they could do a full environmental impact study. If people have been paying attention to the Big Pass dredging proposal, this is kind of the same process that's being played out, where people like me have been asking for this broader, full environmental impact study rather than a smaller assessment. They've concluded a draft assessment and the federal government, with consultation from other agencies, and found that there's likely no significant impact from this pilot project. And so they want to hear comments from the public about their draft findings before they make a final determination. I think that my feeling is that we need a lot more information, and there's another process issue out there that and Julie might be able to help out with this a little more, is that NOAA kind of has been tasked with governing fisheries management in the Gulf of Mexico. There's currently, on a bigger scale, litigation as to whether that's appropriate, because my take on it, NOAA has been promoting, they've been tasked to promote finfish aquaculture, yet at the same time, they're regulating finfish aquaculture. And I think that's kind of at the basis of the fight that's been going on, where there's been a challenge and a ruling in federal court which allowed NOAA to regulate finfish aquaculture. That's been challenged and is now before the appellate court. So on the bigger picture, there's some, as I understand it, there's some big questions as to, even if this permit is granted, there's a lot of uncertainty as to how finfish aquaculture is going to be regulated in the Gulf of Mexico, which in my mind might be another argument for, let's hold off and wait and see how this bigger fight plays out before we start granting permits. Briefly, some of the environmental concerns, and I think the Sierra comments might build on these, and we can as well, but obviously for what I'm focusing on is water quality pollution. Although this project is small in the scale of things, there will be local impacts. We are on the tail end of terrible red tide. I think now we all understand that nutrients can fuel red tide. The fish feed and the feces from the fish will create additional nitrogen contamination, which has to be considered. From my conversations with scientists, a project of this size, from what I've heard, would be unlikely to really significantly contribute to nutrient contamination that would affect our coasts with red tide. It's a relatively small project, but I think that's a concern that we need to really address. One of the things that we could do is require a nutrient management plan if there already isn't one in place to help address those concerns. But again, we're talking about a pilot project, and the big concern here is that if this is approved, there are kind of two camps. One is the camel's nose under the tent, if that's the right way to say it, that this would then open up the Gulf Coast in our area for a dramatic growth in factory fish farming, which cumulatively could create a lot of pollution, which could have a significant impact on red tide and other pollutants of concern.
It's my understanding that this is a pilot program that literally would break open this whole topic for
Kathy.
U.S. water.
Kathy, you're completely unintelligible.
Does not work.
Yeah, I mean, there's the significant concern that the camel nose under the tent could open up industrial fish farming in this area that could endanger our water quality and our way of life. And I think those are legitimate concerns. There's also, along with it, that there are pesticides that when you have a massive amount of fish in a small area, you need to protect the stock from pests, and there are issues with pesticides, antibiotics, impacts on the local habitat, other fish, the sea bottom, the potential for escape, which there have been serious issues elsewhere and failures of this type of project in the Pacific Northwest, where salmon have escaped and could do serious harm to the existing stocks of salmon. I think in this case, those concerns are somewhat mitigated because this is a fish that's already found in the Gulf of Mexico. And there are concerns about the genetic diversity, I think, of the fingerlings that are going to be used in the pens. But these are, again, concerns that I think really need to be addressed and fleshed out, is the potential for escape and what could that mean for the natural fish stocks. Some of the other concerns have to do with the, the source of the fish feed. Jill and I were chatting about this a little, and I haven't really been thinking about this, but these fish are typically fed, and we're not sure what the feed is going to be. I noticed that they're suggesting that they may be using land-based, like not chicken feed, but like corn and farmed soy to feed the fish. That typically, from what I understand, hasn't been very popular with consumers. And there are environmental impacts from that as well. But then there are environmental impacts from feeding them fish that, like menhaden and smaller forage fish that are harvested either here or elsewhere, and then turned into pellets and then used to feed these fish. There are impacts from those fisheries here and elsewhere. So there's a whole cycle of potential impacts that I think need to be considered in this proposal. The other camp, so there's the one camp really concerned about this opening up our whole region to industrial fish farming. And the other camp is more like, this is a pilot project. Let's make sure there are as many controls as possible and learn from it and see whether or not this is something that could be adequately, appropriately regulated and could be something that could be a benefit to our region and our country, keeping in mind that we import massive amount of fish from elsewhere that doesn't have necessarily the types of regulations that we would have. So I'm taking a pragmatic approach and seeing the need for sources of food. I would rather there be a healthy industry of closed loop onshore aquatic aquaculture that doesn't have, it's a closed loop system. So you use the fish poop for agriculture, and you don't have those external externalities. We don't really have that here. You know, we need to look at other alternatives. That would be kind of my preference, but here's what we're facing right now. And so I hope to kind of have a discussion about it. And there are a few weeks before this hearing, and I think that a lot of people in the community are having a conversation. I hope that people attend the hearing, bring your concerns, comment, either individually or if you're affiliated with an organization. I think that they take comments until February 4th. And then if you do comment, they will send you individually a notification of any decisions and actions moving forward. So I probably missed a few things.
No, that's fine, because I'm going to review some of that too.
Okay.
Chris, if you can take a look at, Gail Reynolds is ill, so she's not going to be able to present what the Sierra Club wanted to present. And this is a PowerPoint that that she provided to us. Now, can everyone see it, or do you want to have it read to you?
You can see it.
You can see it, okay.
Okay. Let me know when you're finished. Okay,
Had this one up there for a while.
thank you.
But that's kind of
But,
important,
yeah,
because you've got to
Okay, then
register.
go back.
You've got to register, guys, by a certain date.
I can't see.
Pre-register at the bottom.
Yeah, I think 72 hours.
Yeah, 72 hours.
I'll read this. Nobody can hear what you're saying. We need to have it on the videotape if you wind up providing information. But it takes away from the time. They're encouraging people to follow the process that was established by the Environmental Protection Agency, and that is to register with them at least 72 hours in advance. And you can register at the website that's given here. Can you see it? It's a long, I can read it to you if you want. Does anybody need it written out? It's in the Sarasota News Leader article, and I think that the Observer also covered it. I'm not sure about the Herald Tribune. If you need it, you can get in touch with me and I'll provide it. But they want you to register 72 hours before this, and that's January 28th is the meeting. You do not have to. You can show up there with your written comments and submit it, they have already said. But they would like to have them in advance. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay, and the next. Everybody finished seeing that? Okay, can we go to the next? Okay, next.
Do you think there? are a couple of issues that I just kind of flesh out. I mean, one the thing that I haven't talked about is that we haven't, or if folks have, I haven't. I've tried to get additional input from commercial fishermen and folks in Cortez, and haven't really heard much from them. So that's also a concern that I've had, and that I think as our community we probably should have for how recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen feel about this. The project proponents have said that it would be an asset to recreational fishermen because they'll be able to go out. It's close enough that they can go out and they can scuba dive and they can do recreational fishing around the pens, which would attract other fish in the area. But I think there also be a lot of people in the fishing, angling community and the commercial fishing community that would be really concerned about this, whether it's competing with the commercial fishermen or the threats to their natural stocks. So I just wanted to raise that.
I'll address that at the end of this, because Gail did give me a couple of points she wanted to address. Okay, so has everyone read this one?
Yeah.
Let's go to the next, okay. Okay, the next slide. Okay. Okay, next slide. This is the meeting on the 28th, and it's out at Moat Marine at the Wave Center, and it begins at 5:30. And Gail asked me to point out two other things, and one of them does deal with this issue about the impact on commercial fishing, and that is tied to the discussion about the food that's going to be provided for the fish. This is a pilot program, so it's small scale. It certainly is not going to be what's going to occur if everything follows through and approvals are made. A commercial project with just 80,000 fish as a product is not going to be cost effective. It would be a situation where they'll be asking for a whole cadre and to develop an industry of this. So the question about diet is one thing that I was going to bring up, and that is that when you take away the natural diet from fish, there are nutrients that will be missing from an animal that is a predator on other living animals, is not going to get the same diet that is given to them in a vegetarian diet. We already know that vegetarian humans are deficient in, for instance, vitamin Bs and things like that, and their oils and minerals and other nutrients that are eaten by fish that are not in a vegetarian diet. So Gail was concerned about the fact that if they wind up using the fish population nearby as a source to produce the food for the fish, that this would occur, but also that it would take away those fish from the native fish in the environment and also the birds in the environment that feed on those. So that was the point that she wanted to make. And then I think Julie, if you've got issues that you think need to be addressed, would you come and discuss them, and then I'll present the information that I developed as a summary. Okay.
Hello, I'm Julie Morris. Live in the Ipsa neighborhood. Justin reached out to me when he was trying to prepare for this presentation, and we had a long conversation on the phone. He's covered a lot of what we talked about in that conversation. My perspective on this issue is that I was a member of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, which is the federal council that manages fish in the federal waters of the Gulf of Mexico when we developed the management plan for aquaculture in the Gulf of Mexico. It was a very long process. It was very contentious. It took us a number of years to develop the plan, and the way it works is that the Fishery Management Council develops an overall management plan for a new fishery in the Gulf of Mexico, and then we submit that to NOAA Fisheries, and then NOAA Fisheries develops regulations to implement that plan. And so it was a divided vote when we finally approved the management plan. It was probably back in 2009, 2008, probably 2009. And this permit application is connected to these folks from Hawaii who already are growing fish in nets. I don't think they're in federal waters.
No,
In Hawaii?
They're an open ocean.
I think they're in state waters in Hawaii. I think they're close to shore.
Really?
Because it's very deep,
Right.
close to shore
Right,
in Hawaii.
it's open ocean,
Yeah. And so, like Justin said, the view from NOAA Fisheries is that we really import a lot of fish. And I don't know if you're aware when you're eating at a seafood restaurant or going to your fish market where your fish are coming from, but a significant portion of the fin fish that we consume in the U.S. comes from other countries and is raised in aquaculture. And so we are pretty sure that a lot of that fin fish production internationally that is imported into Florida, into the U.S., doesn't have the kind of health and safety and environmental protections associated with it that we would have if we raised those fin fish in aquaculture here in U.S. waters. And so there's, if we want to be sure that the fin fish that are raised in aquaculture situations that we're eating in the U.S. are done with regulatory programs that protect health and safety and the environment, it's better to raise it here than to import it internationally. So that's the view of NOAA Fisheries. They have been trying to support the offshore aquaculture in federal waters for a number of years. There's trade-offs for each. There's no way that our native wild-caught fisheries can meet the demand for seafood that we have in America in terms of the seafood that we eat. And so one contribution to that solution is to raise more of it ourselves in U.S. waters with a good set of regulations that will protect the environment and protect the people who are working in the industry. When it finally came to taking a vote on this management plan that the council had been working on, there were a number of us who voted against it, even though we had worked very hard to make sure it was the best plan that we could get through the council. But the majority passed it. I think the main issues for us in this region to pay attention to that Justin has already touched on are the management plan requires that only fish native to the Gulf of Mexico are raised in the pens. And some of the escapes that you've heard about in other parts of the country, in state waters in Washington, those were fish that weren't local to Washington state waters, that came from other places in the world. Yeah, and they escaped. So the regulation that governs this operation says that you have to use fish that are native to the Gulf of Mexico. You have to collect your brood stock, the parents that you're breeding to create the hatchlings. You have to gather them locally. You have to make sure that there's genetic diversity in the fish that you're raising, that it's not just the same set of parents.